Folks, it's still Locked On Kenny Pickett week as we are continuing to take the tour of the NFL. Today we will make stops in Washington, New Orleans, and of course, we will make stop in Pittsburgh. We will stay at home. We will be joined by three very special guests, Matt Valdovinos, Maddy Hudak, and Chris Carter. All will be joining us here on the Locked On Pitt podcast. We'll start out with Steelers and go in descending order today. And we will finish it up tomorrow and get where Kenny Pickett may go in the 2022 NFL Draft. But today, it is Saints, Washington, and the Steelers. It's all coming up today on the Locked On Pitt podcast.
Are Locked On Pitt, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Pitt podcast. And as you can see, I am certainly not alone today. We are doing the Kenny Pickett week, Locked On Kenny Pickett week tour, continuing here. And well, we are not leaving the city. We are staying right here. And as many of you may know, my good friend and the great host of Locked On Steelers, Chris Carter, here to talk about Kenny Pickett and the Steelers. But first, I got to talk to Chris. Chris, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, Nick. We're a week away from the draft. Everything's lovely. It's awesome. I'm excited. We only have one more week of having to do mock drafts every day, and then we're fine. But I'm excited, man. It's going to be a great time, and I'm excited to talk about some Pitt players because we got a few of them that are really interesting this year where they'll fall.
Yeah, a few really interesting players here at Pitt that could interest the Steelers, but of course, there's one that clearly sticks out above the rest as numero uno. That could be their 20, that could be the next signal caller for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that is one Sir Kenny Pickett. And Pickett, obviously a guy that has been mocked anywhere from like 6 to 32 and throughout all the range, but a lot of people, and I mean this, I think if you look up the majority of the draft season, and we go back from January to now, I think if it's either Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis who's going to have the most mocks to the Steelers, and Kenny Pickett has been a very, very heavily mocked name to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so I guess the first thing I'm going to ask you, Chris, and, you know, I guess Kenny staying in Pittsburgh, you think it's going to happen? What's the likelihood of it? How do you think the Steelers are looking at Kenny?
I mean, I think the Steelers like Kenny Pickett. I think they like his moxie. I think they like a lot of his leadership qualities and things like that. I'm just not so sure that he's the guy that they're going to take at 20, simply because I think – one, I'm not sure that Kenny Pickett's going to be there. The more I've been hearing, Carolina looks more and more certain as far as Kenny Pickett being a place that he'll go. Of course, Malik Willis plays into that, but based off what I've heard there, I'm not so sure Kenny Pickett falls that far. If Kenny Pickett does fall to 20, I'd have to ask who else is around. Would they be looking at being able to take one of the top 4 corners in this class? Would it be Trent McDuffie or Andrew Booth Jr.? I see Derek Stingley and Ahmad Gardner, of course, being gone by that point. But if one of those corners are on the board, do you think that do you think that the Steelers pass up on getting a potential CB1 for the next 5 to 8 years in their locker room for Kenny Pickett? That's the question there. And you have to look at Kenny Pickett's ceiling. And I know it's been talked to death about what is Kenny Pickett's ceiling and his hand size. As you and I have talked about before off camera, because we've been around each other so much. I've always felt a little worried about Kenny Pickett's arm strength in the NFL, hitting the tighter passing windows deeper down the field. He had a great deep ball percentage rate in college. You saw him hit a lot of those, but they were college open dudes. They were guys that were beating their one-on-one matchups with no one behind them, and he was able to lead them to the right spot. But that gets a lot harder to hit in the NFL. I think Mason Rudolph is a big example of that. He hit a lot of deep passes to James Washington and guys in college football. We saw him do it to Pitt, once for a big day, and that didn't translate to the NFL because those passing windows, they shorten up a bit. So I think Kenny Pickett would be a fine NFL quarterback if he's in the right scheme. I'm just not so sure that with him being 24 years old at the start of this upcoming season, they already have Mitch Trubisky. He would have to probably sit another year or two behind Trubisky. I'm not so sure that's the route they want to go. If he was 21 or 22 years old, I think we'd be talking a little bit different here. But with his age, his arm strength, I'm just not so sure that the Steelers jump at the opportunity to get him unless all of the 19 guys picked ahead of them were all of their BPA 19 top 19 dudes.
Yeah, and that's the question, right? And the Steelers, I think, are in an interesting spot where they don't necessarily have to go quarterback. I mean, they need a quarterback, but if they need to, they can wait another year. They don't need to jump into that pool this year. They're not like Carolina, you know what I mean? I
Right.
mean, Rule and Fitterer are there, and that is a desperate situation. Rule might get fired if he doesn't take his guy, and they need a stabilizing force. So they need someone that can just come in and stabilize that position. And Kenny's like the ultimate stabilizer, I feel like.
He certainly is.
And so, like, as you and I both know, you talked about the arm strength a little bit. Kenny's arm strength is average. I would say that.
Right.
I don't think it's bad.
It's not bad. It's just that it's not elite. Like Josh Allen can throw it, can just throw on his back foot and hit the end zone from like the 40-yard line, from the other 40-yard line. Like Keaton Slovis, even Pitt's new quarterback. I mean, I've seen that man stand on the 35 of the other side of the field and put it up and like almost hit the other goal line. I'm like, whoa, that's a cannon. That's a different type of thing. Now, does Kenny do things better than other guys with stronger arms? Absolutely. That's why he was third in Heisman voting this year. But it's just when you get to the NFL, that's where the changing of what's needed to succeed happens. And that's why it's not a guarantee every year when you think, oh well, that guy was great in college, he'll just be great in the NFL. It's very rarely that simple.
Yeah, and that is a very important thing. And the very interesting thing about this arm strength discussion is, and I kept telling people this, is watch Jordan Addison every time he throws a deep ball to him. It's there, it's accurate, but Jordan Addison has to slow up just a little bit.
Yep.
Just a little bit. And in the NFL, that slow up can be a pass breakup, can be a pick, can be anything. So that's going to be a question. But now Kenny certainly has his strengths, accuracy, moxie, all this different types of stuff. And we've talked about that with all the other NFL Locked On hosts that have been on here. We have talked about that with all these guys. I've talked about it. Kenny has his absolute strength, and I think Kenny's going to be a good NFL quarterback. But when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, fit-wise, was recruited by Matt Canada.
Yeah.
The fit, at the very least, to me, in the type of offense they're going to probably run, with no Ben Roethlisberger anymore, it feels like maybe the middle of the field is going to become a little bit more important. That's Kenny's kind of bread and butter zone. The fit makes sense. The question is, does it make sense within context of Trubisky? How do you feel about the Steelers' fit with Kenny Pickett on just a football level?
I mean, I think if the Steelers become the kind of offense that I think that they're trying to become, at least temporarily, he could fit in there. Like, there is a place for that, because to me, Kenny Pickett's ideal NFL offense, at least for his rookie contract, would be really strong offensive line, which we don't know if the Steelers will have next year, a strong running game with a running back that you can depend on. I think Najee Harris is of that caliber, and good receivers who can get open in intermediate routes and make things happen after the catch. Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool can do that. We'll see who they add in the NFL draft. Miles Boykin, and then Pat Freiermuth is also an asset in that consideration. If they became a short to intermediate passing concept team that was able to attack the middle of the field a little bit more, and then with that and the running game, Kenny Pickett would get some one-on-ones downfield where he could kind of let the ball float a little bit more because teams are so focused on the line of scrimmage. That would be different. And Kenny Pickett's mobility, his ability to create, his ability to dodge traffic and keep his eyes downfield, all those things are factors that you would love if you're Matt Canada. You say, I do like those parts of him. But that's the thing, is Mitch Trubisky's pretty athletic himself. Like, I'm not saying, and he's no Lamar Jackson, but he's a guy that if you get after him, he can make a guy miss. And he still has the arm strength to heave the ball, and he has the athleticism to get upfield and get yards that are right in front of him. And that's really what I think the Pittsburgh Steelers offense needs right now, is a guy who can create with his feet just enough to take advantage of what's there and force defenses to honor that. No defense has honored that for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the past 4 or 5 years. If you bring that element to what they're trying to do, I can really see a balance working there. So could Kenny Pickett be that? Yes, I think he could. But I think the other problem is with them signing Trubisky to his 2-year deal, I'm not so sure that you're drafting Kenny Pickett to have him sit and then be 26 years old when he gets his first start in the NFL.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. So let me break this down to a simple question then. You
Sure.
kind of talked about it a little bit, but We here on the Locked On Pitt podcast, we're trying to find Kenny's next landing spot,
Mm-hmm.
and as circled back almost always to the Carolina Panthers.
Yes.
But what is the scenario in which you see at 20 or wherever the heck the Steelers are, where Kenny Pickett becomes the assured pick at number 20? What needs to happen for you to be, Kenny is at least in very big consideration here?
Well, here's one thing. I think it might not end up being the Steelers. You could see a situation where maybe Detroit, they took a pass rusher with the second overall pick. They're sitting there at 32. You trade back with them, and then you say, hey, give us your last first round pick, your first second round pick, and then we'll give you our second round pick or a third round pick of something of those natures, and then that way you get 2 picks inside the top 40, which I think there's real value in this year, Nick, because I think that if all their top guys go, like if Jordan Davis is gone, if the top 4 cornerbacks are gone, if Kyle Hamilton, which he will be gone, it is gone, and none of the offensive linemen they have graded high, or any of the superstar receivers like Jamison Williams or Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson, if all those guys are gone, then the Steelers get to the tough question of and Malik Willis, because I think he's also a guy they take at 20. If he's sitting there, the Steelers would have a choice, because I'm guarantee you there will be people that are calling about that pick and saying, hey, what we got to do to get in this race. That's where I see Kenny Pickett falling in there, is the Steelers say, you know what? None of the guys that we value at the 20th pick are here right now. There's plenty of guys in this top 40 that we want to get. Just maybe we could double up on it. Let's talk to some of these teams. You got KC with 2 back-to-back picks at the end of the first round. That'd be harder to swing, but I think that the Lions could be a team that say, hey, you know what? We need a quarterback. Let's get aggressive. Let's go up at 20, take him before someone else tries to make a move to snag him and put him on their bench. That's what I can see happening there. And if you can get 2 top 40 picks out of it, I think that's where you say, okay, now you go back, you could get a Daxton Hill, a Lewis Cine, and then also get a receiver on the back end like Sky Moore or like George Pickens. So that's where I can see him falling there. But again, if all those guys are gone and the Steelers are sitting there and they don't like that offer, they're like, you know what? We will add Kenny Pickett, because he's at least a quarterback that's added to the room. He's another camp arm, and you bring him in, and if he beats Trubisky by year 2, yay, great. If not, all right, cool. But I really think the 20th pick for the Steelers needs to be a guy that they're very sure is going to be not just important, but a major contributor over the next 5 years of his rookie deal, and will be around for much longer than that. So that's why I have a hard time seeing it fall that way. But that's the scenario: is the cornerbacks have to have a run, the wide receivers have to have a run, all your key offensive linemen are off the board. And of course, Jordan Davis, I think, is the big defensive tackle they want off the board. You get those guys off and Malik Willis, then I think you're talking Kenny Pickett.
Lot to go right for that. I'll say that.
Exactly.
Lot to happen to make that right. And I do think this. I'm not totally certain they wouldn't take Desmond Ridder over him.
That's another question. Where do they rank him? In comparison to Ridder? Yeah.
And so that is a question to answer, but I don't know. Maybe he could go across the hallway. I know a lot of people, certainly Pitt and Steelers fans, would like to see it. But I don't know if it's going to happen, between the fact that I don't think he's going to be there, and then between the fact that I also don't think he's necessarily A1 on their board. I think, Chris, you have this one on the money. I think he's going to go somewhere else other than Pittsburgh. But the Steelers certainly are one of those top 5 options for him, just because of pure need and the connections as well. Well, Chris, thanks for coming on, man, as always. Let them know where they can find your stuff, man.
As always, you can find me at Carter Critiques on Twitter and Instagram. You can check out the Locked On Steelers podcast, just like you check out the Locked On Pick podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching these videos, go on, hit the like button on Nick's video here, hit the subscribe button to the Locked On Pitt channel to get all of his daily content Monday through Friday. Well, excuse me, I don't know your pace there, Nick. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I do with Locked On Steelers. You can read my work at DKPittsburghSports.com and get all my work at Carter Critiques on Twitter and Instagram.
No. It is Monday through Friday here. Sometimes with a bonus Saturday. I've
there you go. There you go. That's that college initiation. You going and getting it. I see you, Nick.
Sometimes you get the bonus, Saturday episode, and that's all here. Make sure, as always, to go check out Chris's stuff, Locked On Steelers. Make sure to go read his stuff at DK. Does great stuff there. Also, make sure to go check out the Hail to Pitt podcast on the DK Sports Network. Does a great Pitt podcast over there as well. Don't want to miss anything Chris puts out. One of the best out there in the biz. Folks, Chris does great stuff. Make sure to check him out. We'll go now to New Orleans. But first, let me let you know about Built Bar because, folks, do you want a protein bar that is covered in 100% real chocolate and tastes good as well as has all the health benefits you want? Well, Built Bar can do that, and they have the first ever protein-infused marshmallow called Built Bar's Protein Puffs. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. And again, most Built Bars contain only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, while having 17 grams of protein, so you get all of the health benefits of a protein bar while getting the taste. Folks, all you have to do is go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. Again, that's go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. Use the promo code LOCK15 for 50% off at Built.com. Hey, folks, welcome back to the Locked On Pitt podcast, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Panthers. We know it is Locked On Kenny Pickett week on the Locked On Pitt podcast, so we continue to talk through all the NFL teams he could land. I've even reached for a few. I know we've talked to like the Titans, and obviously he's probably not going to go to the Titans or the Commanders, but I think one of the teams he could go to is the Saints. So I'm welcoming in Maddy Hudak. We're going to talk Saints. Kenny, Maddy, first of all, welcome into the show.
Hi, Nick. Thank you for having me. Good to see you on Zoom for the first time since Mobile, right?
Yep, first time since Mobile. So it's been a minute. It's been a minute, but you know, Kenny brings everyone together.
Yes, Kenneth Shane to you.
It's Kenneth Shane Pickett to me. Yes, it is. And I have had the privilege of watching Kenneth Shane Pickett for 5 years up here in Pittsburgh. And hey, maybe you'll have the privilege of doing it for the next 15 in New Orleans. I don't know. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this because Kenny Pickett is kind of the wonderless quarterback right now, if you will. I don't know where he's going to end up. It doesn't feel like, the momentum's moving away from Carolina. It seems like New Orleans is like that middle spot where he could land. I mean, you think this is a real possibility? Kenny Pickett to New Orleans?
I think if the Saints are planning to take a quarterback, I think it's going to be Kenny Pickett. That's kind of my take on it. And that was kind of like when we were at the Senior Bowl, it was kind of hard to assess what exactly, if you're trying to look at it from a Saints perspective, what to look at that point, because they had no head coach and no quarterback at that time. So knowing that the paramount question in that hiring search was who's the quarterback going to be, I paid more attention to that role at the Senior Bowl. And I don't know how to read into, their trade up. Mickey Loomis did just hold a press conference like in the last hour. And he did mention that Philadelphia actually initiated that trade, which is slightly interesting. And I didn't think immediately it pointed to taking a quarterback, because if it did, then you're still banking on either a fall or having to make a draft day type trade. And the people that they might be able to make that with, I've seen trade proposals with the Panthers. Like the Saints are not doing a draft day trade with the Panthers for the quarterback they're both looking at when they have a petty past of taking Tommy Stevens because Carolina wanted them, and then them taking Terrace Marshall Jr., who was a much bigger loss from that type perspective. But it does give them it does give them the option of choice that they wouldn't otherwise have if they had sat, I believe, at number 18 was their original draft slot. I like Jameis Winston. I think he came a long way last season, but it's the most important position on the field. And if you're not sold on your person under center, then you have to go get a quarterback, right? And it really kind of just lies to me on how high the Saints, value Kenny Pickett. But we can go, more into this, but I do think that of all these prospects, he kind of fits the mold the most of what the Saints are looking for. I think a lot about the fact that they tried to jump the Patriots for Mac Jones last year. That really stuck out to me in this kind of air of mobile quarterbacks being, kind of the next big thing, where I'm in the train of thought where I see almost a pendulum switch going more back to that pocket passer type. And I think Kenny Pickett fits that mold, best out of this class.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it is he's not just a pocket passer too. He can boogie, so you still get the mobile stuff that he brings too. He is really good at a structure, but again, he is a pocket guy first. So I like that. And again, he has, even though Sean Payton's gone, I think it was more obvious when Sean Payton was there that he was like a Kenny Pickett guy, like he made sense. I even think now he's gone, though. I think that this is a Mickey Loomis guy, at least, the very least. And again, this is why I kind of keep coming back to him in New Orleans. The fit just makes so much sense to me. He kind of fits what they want with Michael Thomas. He kind of fits what they do. Again, they're not a team that necessarily has to go, push the ball down the field in terms of explosive plays a ton. That's not 100% what they do, at least from what I've seen. So they don't need to be the Seahawks, for example. That doesn't make sense for Kenny because he's not that he can't throw the ball deep. He's just not a great deep passer. So I kind of look at the fit, and I mean that you can kind of offer your thoughts on it. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on his fit overall in the offense and kind of with the weapons they have. How do you view Kenny fitting into that offense and kind of what they want? I think it's a natural fit from what I've observed, but I'm kind of interested in what your thoughts are, knowing you have been, all close up and everything.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, being, that it's still Mickey Loomis in the building. And I think about the fact that they retained Pete Carmichael, and to go to that kind of mobile quarterback thing, what's most clear to me is a lot of teams that draft mobile quarterbacks aren't actually prepared to take on mobile quarterbacks. You have to look at the Ravens as exhibit A, right? Of how you have to approach having a mobile quarterback. And it's a multi-season process to me, but it's one that you have to build an offense around in a way that complements that skill set. And to me, the Saints have really continued to dig into that kind of pocket passer, slice up the middle of the field. They don't need to play hero ball. It's not the Russell Wilson, deep shot kind of thing, even though that's what people, kind of unfairly think of Winston, where I do think he has more of a mid-range skill set. But I'm with you in that I think he makes the most sense with the Saints in terms of being able to execute, what they're looking for at that role. And yeah, it's one of those things that what stuck out to me at the Senior Bowl too, is something that felt lost a little bit last year. And that might've just been a byproduct of the quarterback competition. And that being that there was no starter to kind of take on that starter persona, but it was missing kind of that moxie, that poise, that swagger that you kind of want under center, at least throughout training camp. And again, a lot of factors to unpack there, but what stuck out to me the most at the Senior Bowl more than anything else was how much Kenny Pickett stood out from a personality perspective. Like, it kind of seemed like a lot of the quarterbacks were getting in their own heads at some point or another, that their body language would start to deflate. Am I coming through clearly? Because my thing is starting to lag a little bit.
Yeah, you are.
Okay. They would be a little bit inaccurate, but you would just kind of see their body language deflate. And to me, you are being evaluated in your entirety, and it's not just when you're lined up to throw a pass in practice. And what I saw from Pickett was him continually going up to the coaches and taking those types of points, him pulling the receivers to the side and going over things and gathering them in a huddle before running plays, all those little things that when you're looking past the athleticism traits, the under center traits, it's more that, intangible standpoint. And I thought that Kenny Pickett really stood out the most in that aspect and seems the most NFL primed for that reason, because I do think all of these quarterbacks are fighting an uphill battle this year, and that the perception of them, fairly or not, has been really lukewarm compared to quarterback classes of the past. And it's hard for me to say that won't affect their confidence next season. And so to me, I'm really looking at who really has that kind of swagger, that it factor, that poise and command under center, knowing that they're going to be kind of fighting this perception battle. And Pickett really stood above the rest, especially that category.
It's always been one of his big traits at Pitt too. The moxie, the leadership, the toughness. Clemson game stands out in that regard to me. Diving head first to get the first down in a key moment. He's always been a guy that has felt like that. And so, yeah, if that's the case in New Orleans, I think that's another boon for him. And again, I talked to guys from the Panthers, the Falcons, Seahawks, whatever. And this is the place to me, New Orleans. It makes so much sense what they do, the things that he brings to the table. Now, the one thing that doesn't make as much sense to me, at the very least, and maybe you can kind of ease my concerns on this, is the way in which they attack the offseason at the quarterback position. Because first of all, Jameis comes back, which is whatever, but then they bring in Andy Dalton. So if you're going to get the one guy that's ready to play now, it's kind of a little weird, but I get it. You bring in more competition, but how do you kind of stack up Kenny versus, say, Jameis and Andy Dalton? I guess you could say Kenny's the future and all of that, but how do you stack up those two moves, specifically Andy Dalton coming in versus saying drafting Kenny?
I don't take really any stock in them signing Andy Dalton, to be honest with you. I think that is the definition of, that Chase Daniel role that they've been looking for these past couple seasons, the clipboard guy, the guy that can be kind of a veteran mentorship. The Saints went through 4 quarterbacks was it 4 or was it 3? Now I'm having a complete blank. I thought it was 4 and I can't think of the 4th quarterback. It was, yeah. Jameis, Taysom, Ian Book, and Trevor Siemian in one season. And you could see the drop off after Jameis Winston. And then you could really see the drop off after Taysom Hill as well. I think Trevor Siemian did really well in relief in games, but game plan wise, he was very easy to game plan against. And Andy Dalton is someone that I think is, if the quarterback gets injured, he steps in right away and can execute accordingly. But I don't think there's any qualms about who the starter is going to be. It's just, Trevor Siemian's gone. And then they had Blake Bortles under there for a while who, he hasn't, at minimum, not played in a while. Whereas Andy Dalton has, he played for the Cowboys the other season and has actually spent some time as of recent playing. I think if nothing else, he serves to be a mentor in that room, but I don't think his signing affects my perception of Winston or, any perception of them taking a quarterback in the draft either.
Interesting. Okay. So that makes more sense then. And then you kind of open up the floodgates for Kenny Pickett to come in. So at 16, I know that there have been talks of, tackle, receiver. Now, maybe that's what part of that trade was, to get the flexibility there. But is there any possibility that we see the Saints maybe package those picks up and move up to get Kenny? Or do you think it's more of sticking at those 2 spots, trying to fill 2 holes, whether that's quarterback receiver, tackle receiver, safety receiver, whatever it has been? What do you kind of feel like it could be there?
That's where, to me, it just stands on how high they evaluate Kenny Pickett, because if they value him high and want him, then you have to trade up and get him to me. Like, you can't chance him falling to 16, because all it takes is one team to take a quarterback. And I think it's either going to be Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett. And then whichever team doesn't have a quarterback is going to panic. Like, you talk about the Panthers being a potential destination. They're a team I see panic drafting more than anyone else. And I think you see that a lot of years where there's this run on players and they're like, oh, well, we have to get one of them. And then you don't pick one that actually fits your team or that you really intended to take in the first place. And I just think you see people kind of lose their minds on draft day. So I think they have to have a plan going into it of, if they want Kenny Pickett, then you have to at least be exploring potential trade partners like the Giants, who like to trade back and sit, I believe, above Carolina. But Carolina taking a quarterback, I know it is being circulated, but it's just, if they draft a quarterback after Sam Darnold last year and just all of the decisions they've made at that position, I would quite frankly kind of feel bad for whichever quarterback gets drafted there, because it's just such a mess at that position. But the original point. I think more likely than not, to be honest, the Saints will probably stand pat or trade up if someone they really like falls. I'm not necessarily sure they're going quarterback. I just think if they are going to go quarterback, to me, it's going to be Kenny Pickett. And I know his hand size thing is something people talk about, which, to be fair, is a huge contrast, because one of the things about Drew Brees was he had huge hands, and that overcompensated for, a lot of things. But it didn't seem to be something that's directly correlated to his a fumbling issue. Same thing with Taysom Hill. He had small hands and he had a fumbling issue. I don't necessarily think that was a causation. I think there were a lot of things going on, including just like not entire situational awareness at quarterback for Taysom Hill that led to a lot of those fumbles. So I'm not going to over focus on his small hands. But you thought you brought up a good point earlier where he can be mobile. He just is more of a pocket passer. And I think that's really the sweet spot of where this role is going, because I think what started to happen is there are the mobile quarterbacks that really excel at that. And then there are the guys that were had that escapability in college and used that as a tool to buy themselves more time in a college setting. And that's not going to work when Myles Garrett, Aaron Donald, any of them are staring you down in the NFL. And usually quarterbacks that get drafted early go to teams that more often than not have bad offensive lines. So when you add that into the equation, it all just becomes a mess to me. So I think if the Saints want Kenny Pickett, they have to trade up for Kenny Pickett. You can't wait for him to fall to 16, because then you also risk someone jumping from a later position into one of those spots, not expecting him to kind of fall either. But if they're not exactly sold on him, I would say wait till the top 10, see who falls. And then maybe, again, if you like him, trading up a couple spots is totally fine at that point. But if someone like Kyle Hamilton also falls, it would be hard for me to ignore how good of a prospect he is as well. So I think it is a very curious question for the Saints. That's not an obvious position of need, but it's clearly a position that they were still trying to improve on, given their pursuit for Deshaun Watson and everything like that. And I think they're happy to roll with Winston. But you brought up, they were looking at tackle and wide receiver. And I think a lot of people have not really counted the possibility that they only really like one or two tackles, and those tackles might be gone. And if you don't like Trevor Penning, then, don't draft a left tackle for the sake of drafting a left tackle. And same with wide receiver. People like the Saints need a wide receiver. And yeah, they absolutely do. They need probably more than one wide receiver, but it's not just, to me, well, this is the next best wide receiver, even though they really wanted, is it Olave or Olave?
It's Olave, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And Jamison Williams, if they don't like Drake London, then they're not going to draft Drake London just because he's, the BPA at 16. And so I could see a situation, would be my last thing, where let's say Pickett does fall and let's say those two positions don't really pan out, then why wouldn't you take him at one of those two positions? If you can't get the premium tackle, you can't get the premium wide receiver, Kyle Hamilton's not there, there's not another player to me that, if they're at that point, if they're at least curious on Pickett, you take him at 16, and then you go get one of these really deep wide receivers that I think a lot of them are going to be really good round 2, round 3 players. And the Saints are notorious for finding those players in rounds 2 through 4 and trading up for ones that they really like. So they're always going to be an aggressive team. If they like a player, they're going to trade up and get him. So if they really want Kenny Pickett, I think they will trade up for him. But if he falls, I could also see them not being able to pass him up.
And again, the betting line that came out today has Kenny 16.5 over under. Curious spot to me. I'm just saying, that kind of rose my eyebrows just a little bit. Vegas might know something there. And I think all the points you made are super valid, super in-depth stuff. Kenny Pickett to the Saints, I don't know. Sounds like I think what's going to happen, being what I've talked to with everyone, but I like that fit for him too. And I think it would end up being a really good fit. Well, Maddy, thanks for coming on. Tell them where they can find your stuff, listen to you, do all that great stuff, follow you, do all that great stuff.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Maddy Hudak _94, and then usually on USA Today Saints Wire, which I also post on Twitter. And I would be covering the draft, but the Pelicans decided to make the playoffs this year, so I will probably be at Game 6 for that. But looking forward to see. Or we're all hoping that they might announce it over, the Smoothie King Center speakers of who the Saints end up drafting. But you could usually just find me on Twitter. That's where I tend to spend most of my daily time.
Huge thanks for Maddy for joining us. And we're going to take a trip over to Washington. But first, let me let you know about Rock Auto, because with the ever-increasing number of makes and models. It's not possible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you may need. While you are often pointless or seemingly intimidating and questioning, while the person behind the counter orders for you, while you can order on your computer, because you can save time and money when using Rock Auto. You don't have to spend 30, 50%, or even 100% more from the same parts for your chain auto parts store or car dealership. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, locked on in there. How did you hear about us box? So they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Locked On Pitt podcast. And as always, as you know, this week it is Locked On Kenny Pickett week here on the Locked On Pitt podcast. We are doing the tour of the NFL landscape with teams that could potentially draft quarterbacks, some likelier than others. We have talked about that, obviously. Steelers feel likelier, Panthers feel likelier, and we've had guys on here to talk about that. One of the teams that maybe had felt a little likelier early in the process, but has felt less likely since the Carson Wentz trade is the Washington Commanders. And so the Commanders now feel like they are probably out of the quarterback race for this year, but you never know, I guess, if the value is right and if the right team, the right person falls to them and they like the player enough, I will never, ever wash off this team. And so I want to welcome in my good friend and very long pal. It's Matt Valdovinos.
How you doing? How you doing? Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here. I feel like we've been friends and we talk ball so often, but I feel like we rarely do it for content or for the people. So I'm excited to be here and get to do this.
Yeah, and we don't talk a lot about it. Now, I worked with Matt at Pro Football Network. I've known Matt for a long time at this point. It's been, what, 3-4 years, man?
Something like that, yeah. Very early on my Twitter starting experience.
Yeah, so it has been a while, and Matt is one of those dudes that I just trust that is plugged in everything you can think of with the Commanders, a big-time Commanders guy. And so bringing him on here to talk about the Commanders and the possibility that Kenny Pickett ends up in Washington, D.C., and that is a likelihood that I don't think is very likely. But Matt, I'm going to give this the floor to you. If there's a scenario where Kenny Pickett somehow ends up in a Commander's uniform, how is that scenario playing out?
I think the most likely situation would be them if he slid down in the first, because I think the team's still open to taking a quarterback. I don't think they're open to taking one at 11, right? You traded that capital for Carson Wentz. And even if they did take a quarterback, you would imagine that Wentz is at least going to be the starter this year. Kenny Pickett's kind of viewed as the consensus. If you have to start one right now, he's the guy you want. And so I think that there's a little bit of conflict there, but I know they're open to drafting a quarterback at 47 with their second round pick. Not necessarily think it's possible for Kenny to get to 47, because that obviously implies he falls out of the first, and then also makes it through that, Carolina, Seattle, Atlanta circuit again in the second round. So that feels unlikely, but maybe if he would to fall into that late first area, maybe Washington would want to move up, get that 5th-year option, play Wentz for the year. He has to just get off that, get your contracts off of that fine. And then, there you go, you have Kenny Pickett to kind of follow suit. And I think they have some similar skill sets and the ability to push the ball downfield and a similar frame with the athletic ability to pick up yards with your feet and with their legs, move the chains with their legs. And so I think there are some similarities. I could see Washington being a fan of Pickett. Absolutely. Don't think 11 is going to happen. But if he does see a slide on draft day, I could definitely see them being a team that's interested.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of proposition to me about Kenny Pickett and the Commanders, because I think really, if I look at his fits, I think it's a good fit for him, honestly. I think the offense makes sense for him to fit into it, and I thought it was one of his better fits, actually, when I looked at it overall. At the start of this offseason, I said, okay, the Commanders at 11 makes a little sense, but as you kind of said, Wentz has kind of backed them off that now. So I guess, how would you view the fit of Kenny Pickett if this does happen? How would you view the fit of Kenny Pickett with guys like Terry McLaurin, with the guys that is there in Washington right now, Antonio Gibson, all these talented guys? It's a better offense than I think people kind of look at, and you see that some of the weapons. It's not a bad offense. So when you look at it, I mean, how do you think of the Kenny Pickett fit there?
Yeah, well, I think they want to push the ball downfield, right? They couldn't do that with Taylor Heineke. Kenny Pickett has the arm and the ability to do that. Sometimes balls can get away from him. He can float a little bit, but a lot of rookies struggle with deep accuracy early in their career, and I think he's got the ability to fix that. So I think that would work. I think there's, like I said, there's some similarities to what Carson Wentz does, and I think that's why Kenny Pickett would make sense in terms of a future kind of option, even though he's the guy that we talked about to be the early starter. Just with Wentz, it would be unlikely, but I could see them bringing him in, letting him know, like, hey, Wentz has struggled in these areas, some turnover, some poor decision making, just something to help Pickett get along. But the other thing with Terry McLaurin, like you mentioned, a guy like Jordan Addison has some similarities as a dynamic playmaker with the ball in his hands, not a huge guy, both in that like 6 foot, 190, 195, 6'1", I think Terry is. I think Addison's like 6 foot. So there's some similarities in that, like alpha target not being your generic huge X, but a faster, more dynamic, well-built, well-rounded receiver. So I think that would seem pretty well as well.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me. Just the pro style offense. I think the type of stuff that Scott Turner runs, I think, is a lot of similar stuff to Mark Whipple ran. Middle of the field targeting, a lot of that stuff. And that's what Kenny's best at, middle of the field stuff. And he's the guy that can work 1 to 2 on the front side really well too. And that's one of his really good things, is that he works up his progressions front side really well. He's mobile, so he can make things happen out of structure. I think Kenny has gotten better with the deep ball. I don't think the arm's necessarily elite, which is kind of what's going to hold him back. I think the arm's one of the weaker ones in the class. Again, not a bad arm, but Willis has a better arm. I think Ritter has a better arm. So you look at those guys. Howe has a better arm. Those guys have better arms than Kenny. But Kenny can make that happen. He had a really dynamic connection with Addison. I kind of like your point about McLaurin. I like that fit with him overall. But when you look at Kenny now, I guess coming into the league, you kind of talk about the complicating factor is he's going to want to play right away. He's going to be an older rookie. He's going to be a guy that probably should play right away. Again, I think he's one of the higher floor guys in this quarterback class. I think you have a defined outcome with him. I think he's kind of that Teddy Bridgewater type quarterback prospect that you saw a few years ago. So when you look at him, I think the fit with Washington, because you have that placeholder there, and this was the same thing I kind of ran into with, say, the Steelers, is, they have Mitch Trubisky there, and Kenny doesn't feel like the type of guy that's going to sit year one. So that could be the complicating factor for the Commanders is, okay, if we're drafting, let's draft for upside. So maybe let's not draft Kenny Pickett. Let's draft, say, Desmond Ritter, or, Ritter has obviously play ready stuff, but he has more upside. Or, I don't know, you really want the true wild card in round 2, go with the guy like Sam Howell or something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a more likely scenario for them if they do go to the quarterback position. I think they'll probably target one of the guys who falls in round 2 that they like, or if they don't take him in round 2 at 47, which I think is an outside shot. Like, I don't think that's the expectation. I just think that's something that's on the table. I do think that there's a bit of an expectation that they could take, or they will take, a young guy in those later rounds, that 6th and 7th round. So a guy like Caleb Ellaby or someone like that, just because they want a young person on the team, just in case anything were to happen. There's a disastrous season, Carson Wentz gets hurt, Taylor Heinicke stinks it up, just someone to have there and maybe be in your system for the next couple of years. And so I do think quarterback on the board. I don't think it's going to happen at 11. Obviously, like you said, there's that conflicting interest in Kenny probably being the quarterback that would start right away. But knowing Ron Rivera, I do think that if Kenny Pickett was just the better quarterback right out of the gate than Carson Wentz, right, that he wouldn't necessarily sit Pickett still and still start Wentz. I think if he was just a better player, he would start him regardless. Or they struggle throughout the year, Wentz goes into a little struggle throughout the year, they find a place to play Pickett, whether it's out of a bye week or something like that. Could be, you never know. But I think you're always, with teams who don't know the future of their quarterback position, there's always a chance that they will take the guy that they really like.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment, because Ron Rivera kind of talked at the combine about what he wants in a quarterback, and he kind of screamed vet quarterback, like, I want a vet.
Yeah.
But Kenny Pickett is kind of
the closest. Yeah.
He kind of is there, and he already operates the same. His obviously the best traits that he has are intangibles. He's tough as nails. The guy is competitive. He's poised. He's very tough. He kind of has every single trait on the intangible list that makes me feel like, okay, if I'm looking at Ron Rivera, this is a Ron Rivera guy. Like, he strikes me as a Ron Rivera guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that definitely makes sense to me. I think Matt Corral is also a Ron Rivera guy, like a Marine son, right? You can always just see the traits that Ron really, really goes for. And I think Pickett does fit that as well. Desmond Ritter, too. That's why they were at that Cincinnati Pro Day. Just, head on your shoulders, going to come in and work every single day. Your team tells you that, right? You're voted the captains. Everyone's very vocal about how important you were to the the team or to the program. And so I do think that Kenny Pickett fits that as well. And if a team doesn't know their long-term plan at quarterback, the guy they love is always on the table.
Yeah, and the Commanders did have a sizable presence at Pitt Pro Day as well. So makes sense that they were there. They were there to probably see Kenny and Pickett and see what they could do there. I do wonder if there's maybe a scenario where they trade back here. Is there a scenario where you talk about trading up? Is there a scenario maybe where they trade back from 11 and then they're sitting there, say mid-20s or so, and Pickett's still on the board, and they're like, yeah, let's take a rip on this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think speaking to the Steelers, should Malik Willis somehow fall out of the top 10, be there at 11? I know we have talked about them being fans potentially, so maybe they move up, you get there down to what, pick 20? And so maybe that would be a place, right? That makes sense. I definitely think that Washington would be open to it. The whole thing about trading back, and you know this, is there's got to be someone willing to move up or someone that wants to move up for some reason. So I think depending on how the board falls, we'll see. We'll know. I think a quarterback falling is the most likely situation of them trading back. So maybe Kenny Pickett is there on 11 and they do trade back, but it's because someone's moving up to go get Pickett. So you never know, but I think that's the most likely scenario of a team moving up.
Yeah, again, not one of the likelier scenarios to me. I don't feel like Pickett to the Commanders is going to be a likely option. I think the Saints, the Panthers, the Lions are as a wild card, and then the Steelers are your four big teams. We have said that multiple times here. Feels like that's where Pickett's going to go. But right now, Pickett kind of feels like a place, a man with no home right now, and he'll find a home eventually, and we'll see.
Soon, less than a week.
He will find a home, and he will probably be called in those first 32 picks. It would be the likely expectation. I think everyone has him in that first round, so we'll see where Kenny Pickett ends up. And maybe, who knows, everyone can be shocked and he can become a Washington Commander. Who knows, Matt?
I'll come back on the show.
All right. Who knows? All right, Matt. Thanks for coming on. As always, tell them where they can find your stuff, follow you, do all that great stuff, man.
Absolutely. You guys can follow me on Twitter at MV Scouting. We love to have some banner. Please come over, talk ball. It's always a good time, in my opinion. And all of my draft stuff this year is getting put on to the Straight Facts podcast and their YouTube channel. Some dudes that I really love, help with some graphics, do great stuff. And their show's awesome. Go check that out. So that's where you can find me, but I just appreciate the love. Nick, thank you for having me on.
Folks, thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Pitt podcast. Tomorrow, we will have a big episode here of the Locked On Pitt podcast. We will talk Kenny Pickett, where I think he will eventually land, my final evaluation. It'll all be here on the Locked On Pitt podcast. We will talk about all of it coming up on the Locked On Pitt podcast. Make sure to tune in tomorrow there on draft day. It's all coming up, folks. As always, thank you for listening. And as always, hail to Pitt.